Hello, everyone. This is the Revolutionary Think Tank podcast, episode 29. For those of you joining us for the first time, this is a podcast about political commentary, protest music, and revolutionary thinking. My name is Myster E, and my co-host with me today is 4IS. 4IS, how are you going today?
Yeah, I'm going pretty well. How about yourself, Mr. A?
Thank you. I am well for IS, and we have a very exciting topic, I think. Today, we're going to grill you for IS and put you in the spotlight and ask you some very interesting questions, I
Mm.
think, and very, very important questions from a revolutionary perspective and also just a general kind of what do we do next question. An important question that was posed by old mate Lennon. What's to be done? I think from a progressive perspective, from a revolutionary perspective, if you can't get in there and get your hands dirty with revolutionary activity straight off the bat, then you can be politically active and you can work towards things. And I've had, I've heard some very prominent people on the left or in just revolutionary circles generally speak about the idea when asked and probed by, simple people, simple folk like us,
Mm.
as to what can we do now? Like there's all these nice aspirations for revolution and aspirations for change and progress and all this sort of stuff. But what can we do now as just general people, maybe not connected politically,
Mm.
maybe not able to dedicate their entire lives to a movement or a cause? What is it that we can do next, or what can we do to affect change and to enact change? And like the one thing that I see coming up from these, titans of progressive movements and people that have just these long-standing kind of active political lives. And have, now the knowledge to pass on to the next generation of activists and what have you. They say that all real action happens one at the grassroots level
Mm.
because they have a true belief in democratic systems. And they do believe holistically and, as a totality, because we exist in liberal democracies. And while they might seem very tokenistic, the structures themselves are there at the
Mm.
fundamental level. And if you pick up on those structures and you try to get them moving and get involved with them, democratic systems still hold a lot of weight over the status quo, over the machine that is the capitalist order that drives the world economy, and drives all of our thinking and all of our ideology, while it's always under attack by, the people that are in the positions of power in the bureaucracy and
Mm.
out there in like the titans of industry and the rulers of the economy. While it's always under attack by them, it would seemingly feel like they control everything. They are still accountable to
Mm.
democratic institutions. And we had a very interesting conversation offline, and I asked you kind of, what it is you thought about the grassroots roots kind of movement and actually getting involved in existing democratic situations and
Mm.
frameworks. And the responses you gave me just were blowing my mind. And so I thought I really need to delve down into what this actually means. So look, for our American audience, like you don't actually have an active or a Labour Party that's got a stake in the race. Most other liberal democracies around the world, in a Western context anyway, have an actual active Labour Party
Yeah.
or some type of party that aligns itself with traditional or, you know, more traditional kind of working class ideals.
Yeah.
So, with your understanding then of the working class movement slash the Labour Party, kind of understanding of the political process
Yeah.
for AS, please tell us, what do we do next? How do we get involved? What happens at the actual grassroots level?
Yes, and I guess before I go into a proper answer about this, I want to preface what I'm about to talk about is from the Australian Labor Party perspective, but also to at least show any of our international viewers as well, is that, unlike the US, unlike the UK, which was very much heavily affected by neoliberalism, by the smashing of unions. Like really, the unions were so smashed in, the Thatcherite governments that it's kind of the huge reason why in the UK cooperatives are a huge thing in comparison to unions. Now, but the funny thing about the Australian landscape is, yes, like obviously Australia was influenced by neoliberal policies in the 70s and 80s, like any other country. But what's interesting about the Australian landscape, or at least the labor movement in Australia, is that it was able to hold on to its union movement. That at least the Labor Party didn't divulge into like pure austerity measures, and like everything kind of fell apart. Like the
Mm.
Labor Party did keep in touch with its roots. Like, I'm sure there's probably going to be people out of there, or, well, sure, the Australian Labor Party was the first one of the very first socialist labor parties in I guess the globe.
Hmm.
Is it fully exactly the same as what it was? Well, no, because the one thing that we can guarantee in life is there's going to be change.
Mm.
And but what I can say is that it has held on to its union roots. The ACTU is massive within Australia. Like every single state and territory, like has its headquarters, its base of operations for the union movement. And really, what I'm going to be discussing about today is, look, social media is prevalent within today. Everyone kind of has their opinions. Like, we only have to look at climate change, the access to secure jobs, in our countries and that sort of thing, where, people get angry. They obviously rise up and want to do something about it, but then they become disenfranchised when they feel like their voices aren't being heard.
Mm.
And what joining the Australian Labor Party has taught me is that, what does it mean to be part of an organization?
Yeah.
Now, being part, like once you join the party, and this is probably like a status quo throughout any sort of Labor Party that has occurred in the globe. You have your caucus, so those are probably the people that are the politicians, or their basically their staffers that work in their offices. And
Yeah.
then you have your card carrying members that are considered the rank and file. So
So is
the
the caucus, like, to be in the caucus, do you have to be a card carrying member? You have to be a member of the party.
Yes, correct.
Everyone's a member of the party.
But yes, correct. Like to be
Okay.
part of, like really at the end of the day, to be part of the Labor Party, it is a collectivist mindset. So it is coming together because you believe in the labor movement. You have been a member, and probably the people that are part of the caucus are people that were part of Young Labor, that were they kind of joined the party when they were um in high school. They joined um when they were in high school, and they've gone through the ranks.
Yeah. Yeah.
They've
And
most
how do you become a member?
well,
Like, is it like some type of like rite of passage kind of thing? You have to do some trials, and yeah, is there any type of initiation service, or you're interested, you get invited by another member, or you just rock up to a meeting? Like, how does one get involved? Just generally.
oh, okay. Well, look, I'd imagine probably that the typical way of getting involved is probably through university politics. But
Hmm.
really, at least my experience of how I joined the party was, well, I grew up in the electorate of Blaxland. So this is, pretty much, if anyone knows Sydney, that's basically Blaxland, that's basically Bankstown, and the southwest of Sydney, which is Paul Keating's old seat.
Hmm.
Um, uh, I look, I'm a person that's been a Labor supporter through and through life. Look, and I like, even my partner, her family, like the my mother-in-law, she was actually helped by Gough Whitlam and the free education. Like, the reason why she ended up being a professional the way
Mm.
she is, a lawyer,
Yeah.
was because of Gough Whitlam's equalizing policies
Yeah.
for free education. So
Hmm. Hmm.
basically, both sides of the family that I'm involved in were Labor supporters. So
Mm.
it was just natural for me, because around the time that I got involved, this was when Scott Morrison was in power, and like
Yeah.
things just kind of got bad to worse, and I felt compelled to, I've always wondered what it would be like to actually be part of the party. Like,
Mm.
I knew there were volunteers that gave out the pamphlets during the day. I just decided to throw my hat into the ring and be more involved and see where that took me.
Right. And
And
so did you what, volunteer your services? Like, did you go along to a meeting? Was there a hazing ritual of some sort? Did you have to swear an oath on the Bible? Like, what did you do, or what would the average person do to become part of a party, like become a member?
Well, look, effectively, what my journey was I wanted to be involved. I hopped onto their
Yep.
website. Um, I paid of the annual fee to be a
Yep.
member, and
Yep.
then basically somebody from the party got in contact with me. We had a lovely chat, and then they just put me in contact with the secretary and the chairperson of my local branch. That
Right.
happened to be in the inner west of Sydney, where I
Okay. So
currently
no,
live.
no, no swearing of an oath, no hazing ceremony, no blood rituals or sacrificing any animals or anything like that. You
No, no.
basically did what any person would do in the modern era, and you hopped on the internet and you searched up the party's website and you joined that way and was contacted following that. So it sounds all about, so far very, very simple and very easy for
Yes.
people to get involved. That's what I'm hearing.
Yes, yes, and I'd imagine, look, with any of the other established parties that are out there, whether that's the Nationals, the Liberals, the Greens, like
Hmm.
I'd imagine that would fundamentally be exactly the same process. But
Excellent.
from the Labour's perspective,
Yes.
because really that's all I can really talk about,
Mm.
is there's two main when actually being in the Labour Party, I found there's two major actions to organize within the party.
Mm.
And that is volunteering, and that is policy creation.
Okay, sorry.
Now,
Before we get into logistics
yeah,
and processes,
yeah,
you mentioned earlier that, okay, you signed up and then people contacted you from the party and made you aware of your local branch. Can you
correct.
can you explain that a little bit more?
Okay, well,
So what's a local branch and what does that involve?
yes. So I guess this kind of goes back to what we were talking about before about there's the caucus, so those who are the politicians and their staffers. These are people that probably have been that um not nine times out of 10, well, pretty much, they've been in the party and, they've seen many, many elections and they're now running for office. And
Mm,
those are the ones that are pretty much in charge. Then there's the rank and file. So this is your typical card carrying person. And basically, with where you live, they basically join you up with other card carrying members and the branch, your local branch, that's basically like the lowest unit in the sense of the smallest unit in their collective organization of the labor movement. So
mhm.
this is where you like once per month you go to where the branch holds its meetings, whether it's at a pub, whether it's at a local community hall. I actually quite like where we hold our one, which is at the local hotel, where it's of a dim a dimly lit room where I think the secretary once joked that we sometimes we act like Bolsheviks huddled in the corner,
Nice.
us conspiring
Yeah.
against the establishment. I always appreciated that because it's funny because of all the revolutionary literature that I
Yeah.
read. Like I'm considered the revolutionary in the branch.
Mm,
But
mm.
I digress.
Yeah, which is that's a whole conversation in and of itself right there, but a very interesting point.
But basically, at the local branch, you have delegates that come to you. So these are delegates from local government, from state government, and from the federal government that give you reports of, what's been happening in the caucus or what's been happening in the labor movement within politics in general.
Slow down, slow down. So you've
Yes.
got a meeting at the branch
Yeah.
at some type of location that
Yes.
is agreeable to all of the local branch members who are
Yes.
these card carrying rank and file members that you're talking about.
Yeah. Yeah.
But at these branch meetings, you're saying that other people come, these are delegates, and are
Yes.
delegates people that are representing the rank and file of the branch, or they're people that
Yes.
have come from outside of the branch into the branch meeting.
Yes, so this can be, well, actually, it's kind of both
Okay.
because uh, what ends up happening is either the branch actually has a specific delegate that either goes to the local council. We're kind of going into policy creation stuff here. We're kind of doing things backwards, but I'm sure we'll get into this later. Um, Either you have a delegate that's part of your branch that specifically goes to the local council, the state council, or the federal council, and then reports back and lets you know exactly what's happened in terms of policy creation and reports back to the branch, or you have somebody who was the secretary or at least a representative of that local council, state council, or federal council that comes back to you and gives you a report of what had been decided in policy creation.
But those people are members of the Labor Party themselves, these
Correct.
delegates. Yeah.
Correct.
And so the branch could potentially, though, have like a delegate in any type of political organization. I'm assuming is someone that's just delegated a position or a responsibility by the branch. Is that done then by democratic means, or are these people got their
Yes.
posts because they've got some type of skill that nobody else has, so that's why they've been given the delegation to do certain activities, or
Yes.
are you
So
they chosen? Sorry,
yes. So basically, once per year, there's an AGM where,
in the
um,
branch.
within the branch, where uh, everyone can put up their hand as to whether they want to be the president, whether they want to be the secretary,
Hmm.
or whether they want to be the delegates for electoral council state electoral council or local electoral council, which is what the LEC, SEC, and FEC stands for.
Right, I can see that in the slide there. Okay. Okay.
And like that's much more on the policy creation side. But to give you a little taster of what I mean by the volunteering side, is that whenever you have an election coming up, or which is a very special scenario that's coming up for Australia at the moment, where we've got a referendum coming up later this year
Okay.
about
Yep.
the voice to parliament.
Hmm.
Um, the branch is basically ground zero where we're figuring out, oh, well, does anyone have time in order to, um, you know, uh, cold call, cold call some people within a marginal seat, or at least some people that the office feel um, might be influenced by just calling them, having a chat, seeing what they think are
Mm.
important issues leading up to the next election. Or, in the case of the voice to parliament, hey, what do you think about the voice to parliament? Do you have any concerns?
Mm.
Uh,
And
th-
when you say cold call, you mean you're
yes.
just literally blindly calling people that are from a particular area of interest, like a geographical location of interest that you're targeting, and you're literally just calling citizens randomly.
Well, yes, that's what the phone banking is.
Okay.
Which brings me to the second lot of that, which is the door knocking, which is effectively um whether it's like on the weekend and that sort of thing, you basically go to the local area, and you door knock on like citizens in the area or local residents. And again, you talk about the upcoming election that's happening, or as I said before, the referendum that's happening, and you just kind of get the general understanding of what they think are the
Hmm.
issues, why you should be voting yes, because I can definitely tell you that the voice to parliament, Labor wants you to vote yes on that voice to parliament question.
Mm.
Or if it were an election, why you should be voting for Labor, or how you can influence people and that sort of thing.
Mm.
But with volunteering, this is where volunteering and policy creation, I guess, meet at a head. Is that what's great about volunteering is uh, another aspect to this is, say, for example, there's a climate protest that the branch wants to get involved, or at least the Labour Party wants to get involved, and you go along to that. But what ends up happening is a rank and file movement out of that. That's kind of the reason why I got involved leading up until the state election to Labor's rank and file policy movement, and all the current commitments that New South Wales State Labor have done to, um, keeping the stock of like public housing, and at least looking to improve it. Like all of their policies with that was started from this rank and file movement. But what's so interesting though is that we wouldn't have gotten the impetus, or we wouldn't have at least been able to stage a case at the New South Wales state conference, because really all policies, all emotions that are created in branches and go to the LEC, SEC, and FEC, they then go to the state conference, where basically, like in a parliament, they are collectively argued, where people make arguments for and arguments against. And this rank and file public housing movement, we actually talk to the local community groups in the area. So Red Watch, in Redfern, which is like a a
Hmm.
community group.
Yep.
There's the Friends of Erskineville, which is again another housing group
Yep.
that's in the local area
Are these like
uh,
community housing providers, social housing providers? Like what type of organizations are these?
no, these are basically community group local
Okay.
grassroots community groups that fight for public housing or social housing
Housing.
within
Right.
those areas. And the
Mm.
thing is, we had to speak to those groups. We had to speak to um, because I think there were established glebe residences that were public residences that the last New South Wales Liberal government was looking to knock down those residences in
Hmm.
order to create more flashy property
Right.
for property
Right.
developers. And
Yeah.
we by speaking to those residences and the community groups, we were able to at least create some sort of steam to lead to the state conference that, hey, maybe you shouldn't be knocking down these houses and maybe you should be protecting this land for the community because it's
Wow.
important for the
Wow.
community.
So you're effectively saying that thanks to one of these shady Bolshevik meetings in a pub based on some type of door knocking and information collection from the actual community, then the branch was able to suggest policy that was suited to kind of protecting the interests of not only working people, but like the housing, which is an essential and a human right. They were able to protect public housing options within the local area because of that grassroots action. And they took that initiative and that policy creation idea to a state conference, which involves, I'm assuming, the caucus, so the main kind of
Mm.
political figures themselves, and then that policy issue was debated in
Yes,
a forum.
yes,
And then, if it's debated and carried, is then put into the official agenda of the party at that state level and is now
yeah.
being carried potentially into actual policy.
Yes, because there's basically two choices. Either uh we present it to the Lex, Sec, and Fec, and the caucus just decide, yeah, that's a really good idea, and we'll just implement it.
Hmm.
Or the harder route, which is um either they support it in principle and it doesn't end up happening, or you take it to the floor, you take it to the state conference floor, and you you fight it out. You have the yay sayers and you have the naysayers, and
And is it like a majority rules cup situation, or do some people
for
have veto power, or like how does it work?
well, that's where the delegates from all of the different branches come in. So, but and I should also mention that with these sort of conferences, you not only have delegates that are from the Australian Labor Party, but you also have delegates from all the unions, because
Right.
so and without uh, without revealing too much, I can say that this public housing uh, motion would not have gotten off the floor if it wasn't for unions like the CFMEU.
Wow.
But
So they're not just consulted. The unions aren't another body that's separate to the Labour Party movement or the Labour Party as a political organisation. They're actually involved in the process in terms of decision making.
yes, because when it does get to the high levels like um, your state conferences and that sort of thing, yeah, the unions have a seat at the table when it comes to the Australian Labor Party.
Okay, so
And
the state conference then is delegates of the branches, caucus, and delegates from the unions.
yes, pretty much.
Okay, so it's not the rank and file that are there, like saying yay or nay. It's their delegates. that are there
Yes,
on their behalf. Yeah.
but the delegates are democratically
Yeah,
elected
yeah, yeah.
by the
And they're
branches.
picked by the branch to act on their behalf. That's why they've been delegated this power. So hopefully they're enacting it. But like a delegate would assume to me, as opposed to someone who's elected to serve a term, a delegate is someone who can be recalled, right?
Well,
Or
correct.
is that done just annually, and then they usually serve their 12 months, but they can be recalled if by the
Uh,
branch, right?
well, that's the reason why not only do you have a delegate for the Lex Sec and Fec, but you also have alternates. So
Right.
I'd imagine, I've not personally seen this, but I'd imagine for my local branch, if say for example, I put myself up to be the state sec, and let's imagine a scenario where I said I deliberately went to the state electoral council in the area, and I went in there with the intention of securing more public housing for the area, and I had that every intention, and my local branch knew that I wanted to do that. Um, and for some reason, I decide to renege on
Mm,
that
mm,
promise.
mm,
Um, that's the reason why you have the alternates, because not because people like because people obviously would be angry at me that I
mm.
went against my promise. And
Yes.
like really how they're typically done on a day-to-day basis is when a delegate doesn't can't meet a certain council meeting, usually your alternate steps in just so you have a seat at the table at that electoral council meeting. But sometimes they're used for another purpose.
Mm,
And I can tell you right now that if a delegate didn't follow what their mandate was, then they will be replaced.
yeah. Yeah. Very interesting. So it's grassroots in its inception, potentially, some
Yes.
policy. So it's not just stuff that's coming out of the interests of the political minds of those that have the political positions, like the actual elected officials. It's coming up from the organization itself, potentially from a grassroots movement and initiative.
Yes. So let
And
me,
it's democratically controlled because the people
yeah.
that are potentially providing these initiatives can be recalled if they step out of tune with that grassroots kind of understanding.
Well, let me give examples, because really, with the volunteering side, with those kind of rank and file movements that I was kind of saying to you before, um, hey, there's been some very successful ones. So in 2019, after the coalition did win government, and of course there was the major I guess the major talking point that came out of that, which was the Adani scandal, and obviously in the Hunter region in New South Wales, there
Mm,
was all of that talk of, well, hey, we've got all these coal-fired power stations. You want to do a transition period?
mhm.
What about us? What are you like? What are you going to do in terms of the transition? Because you can't just drop us like
Yeah,
a bunch of sack of potatoes.
yeah.
And what actually came out of that is all of the unions and all of the rank and file branches in the area was like, great, you know what? Let's do something about this. And that's where the Hunter Jobs Alliance came from. And it's
Hmm.
been the basically the collectivist union in that. Oh, sorry, the collectivist. Well, sorry. Let's say the collection in that area, that kind of labor movement, it was
Hmm.
their job to work with the community groups in that area, with the unions in that area, and go to employers, or at least find out the logistics of how do you transition these kind of jobs to a much more, I guess, greener society. So like
Mhm.
one that has renewable energy instead of the coal powered fire stations.
Yeah.
And this Hunter Alliance, Jobs Alliance, has done quite well to at least upskill the workers in the area and I guess not leave them in the cold.
Mm.
And really, that was the unions and that was the rank and file groups that led that. So I would almost say that a branch or a rank and file branch is basically an organization within itself because really the branch reaches out to other branches and it's
Yep.
like, hey, there's this really important issue. Maybe we should go to the local community hall and bring all the local branches together. Hell, sometimes even um, the local electoral council or the state election council in that area. Because I don't know if I made it quite clear, but it's not just one big local election council or state election council. You
Mm.
have one for like the general area that everyone comes to. Like sometimes that local election council will almost help out the area and be like, hey, we understand that this is an important issue for you. Why don't we just hire the whole to have a rank and file meeting?
Mm.
And I've had ones on climate change. I've had ones when you know the abortion laws in the US when they were receded.
Mm-hmm.
I think
Yep.
it was the end of last year. I attended a rank and file meeting where um, the local activists in the inner west area where I was explained to the local group as to what's going on in that situation, why it's important for Australia and that sort of thing. There was
Mm.
obviously the public housing one that we actually got to the New South Wales um, state conference floor, and
And how did that go? Did it get up?
well, yeah, that's basically what I was saying before is that that public housing motion was what Labor brought to the New South Wales state election.
Okay, so it wasn't just debated on the floor and yeah, and discussed. It was actually it's been part of the agenda now for their
Yes,
policy action. Wow.
yes.
Yeah. Okay, and so previously you had mentioned that in the branch you would have a president and a secretary.
Mhm.
President elected for a term, I'm assuming like a delegate.
Mm.
Yep.
Yeah, so um yeah, I guess we're kind of jumping all over the place.
We are, but
Hope
I
both.
really wanted to try and come back to that because you mentioned it as part of the dynamics of a branch
Well,
before you started talking about the delegates. So I just want to cover that to make sure I understand what is a president, how do they get there, what do they do?
okay, well, my understanding of what the president is they're pretty much the one that is because we usually have an agenda of what each meeting is you have the various introductions of like um announcing new members if there was anything from the last meeting that needed to be resolved. You then have the reports, and then you have any motions or any issues the that members wanted to bring to the branch in order to start the process to make it policy within the labor movement.
Hmm. Hmm.
So the president is basically in charge of all of that, where they're the sitting chair, where they're asking um, who wants to move to say for example set the minutes like or at least um the if there were minutes that recorded everything that happened in the previous meeting. Hey, can I please have somebody move that we accept that? Can I have a second pass? Who wants to say yes to this? Who wants to say no to this? Okay,
Mm,
that's moved and next thing. So they're basically like an arbiter that
mm,
is keeping it a well-oiled machine, like the meaning
mm.
as a well-oiled
Okay.
machine, and at least saying, hey, let's do this, let's do that. The
Mm,
secretary is basically the person who has the book of everyone that signs in and keeps a record of like all the notes that happen in the meeting and that sort of thing.
mm.
Um, and then yeah, the delegates are the ones that do the reporting. And then, as far as I'm concerned, that's after all of that, that's when the fun begins with the policy creation.
Yeah.
Because
Yeah.
um, I've found with policy creation, uh, it makes you want to keep your ear to the ground as to all the general things that are happening within society, and then starting the process of actually doing something to remedy that within the party. So the classic one that's happened recently is I found out via an ABC news article that there's this rural town called Jugion. And in Jugion, in New South Wales, in rural New South Wales, um, there are 11-year-olds that are working at this jam factory where this owner of the factory has these basically these school kids going to their parents having to get permission uh, to get a tax file number in order to work at this jam factory because they've got labor shortages in this rural town.
Mm.
And this ABC article was like, oh, it's super fun. Like the kids say it's super fun to work at this jam factory.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
I've like, because next week I actually have the branch meeting with my local
Yeah.
branch, and I'm working on a motion to be like, yeah, I reckon the New South Wales Labor government, the new Labor government should
Mm,
do a review because like that doesn't sound right to me. The
mm.
fact that like don't get me wrong, I can't say that I know the local situation, but
Yeah.
I don't think it's right that, or at least I feel like something should be investigated into why a bunch of kids have to work at a factory in order for it to run.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
plus, like, even when I mentioned that I was working on this at people at work, one of the very first things, one of the very first questions I had was a young mother turned to me and she was like, "Oh, but but what happened? What like what when do these kids go to school?"
Yeah.
And I was like, "Good question.
Yeah. Thank
I
you.
reckon I reckon somebody
Yeah.
should investigate that."
Yeah. I thought we dealt with this like 150 years ago, and kind of got rid of child labor. Yeah, it's very interesting. And so like what you're describing here is like through a political organization in a democracy, there is a level of scrutiny and desire at, again, to use this term that's been thrown around a lot, grassroots level, so at the community level, at the very kind of most basic level of society, and like people have got concerns and they're voicing them, and they've got a forum to do that, and potentially have that sort of thing investigated through the organization, and even potentially addressed through
Mm,
the workings of that party, especially or if they're in power. Obviously, if they're in power and they have political sway. But like you're saying that
yes.
the rank and file can influence the larger beast. It's not just things that come from politicians and elected officials.
Mm.
There are things that come from average people that are average members.
Yes, and really, the Labour Party is like it wouldn't be a functioning Labour Party if all the motions weren't coming from the branches or they weren't coming from the bottom up.
Mm,
because if it wouldn't be part of policy, or at least it wouldn't be part of the labor movement unless it was coming from the branches. It was actually genuine concerns that are coming from the branches.
mm.
And
And
yeah,
yep,
go for it.
I was going to say, and do you find the people that go on to be elected representatives and form part of the caucus, um, do you find that they're generally people that are from the rank and file that have moved up, or they're a different type of breed from the rank and file?
Look, I can't say that I've been with the party long enough to determine that. But what
Mm,
I have known is, like, I have heard a few comments here and there that, like, if there is a person that's sitting for a certain electorate, I have heard that, oh, so and so used to be a staffer of X, or
okay.
they used to be a staffer of Y.
Mm,
But I can definitely tell you that um, there have been previous premiers, sorry, previous opposition leaders, like for
yep.
example in New South Wales state politics, that they were elected by the rank and file.
Wow.
Like, uh,
Mm,
like, okay, I'm pretty confident that this is common knowledge, but the previous opposition leader before Chris Minns came in, Jodie McKay, she was elected by the rank and file at
mm,
the state the New South Wales state election. Like when they were actually looking for a new leader,
yeah. Wow.
she was put in by the rank and file.
Wow.
And I I I don't think I was there when Chris Minns came to power, whether it was a similar process when Jodie
Mm,
McKay stood down, but I've definitely heard from people in my local branch and in the general area in West that that certainly happened for Jodie McKay.
mm, mm.
Uh,
Okay,
uh,
so I'm just trying to establish like how the validity and the truth behind those notions that I spoke about right at the start of this podcast, which was that there are democratic institutions out there, and you don't need to kind of recreate the wheel or revolutionize the system straight away. You need to be working within and creating or using the democratic mechanisms that are available to us to try and get things moving and start your political process. And once you get a thirst and a hunger for that and experience in that, then you can cavalcade that into this larger kind of political movement. So, like as Marx would say, get involved in the economic struggle as well as the political struggle. And like with both of those wheels in motion, then you can start to move towards the revolutionary aims. But you need to be doing both of those things, which is
yes,
interesting that the Labour Party has that crossover with the economic and the political struggle being side by side with the involvement of the unions directly with the party and the decision-making process. So you have those two kind of working class revolutionary
yeah.
moments happening at the same time.
I also probably wasn't particularly clear, and I'll just clarify this, is that when I was saying like, oh, so and so used to be an old staffer of X or an old staffer of Y,
Mm,
I would say when it does come towards an election, there's a pre-selection period. So
mm,
typically what happens is yeah, like people put their hands up in their local branches and whatnot to want to stand for a certain electorate, and then there's a pre-selection process. Like for example, when it was coming up to uh, the New South Wales state election,
mm,
where I am, the electorate is Newtown. For that, that's obviously a green seat.
mm,
We actually had a pre-selection between somebody and the person who ended up being the winner, which was David Hetherington. And that was a proper pre-selection period where people ask questions about certain issues, At the pre-selection, David and his his opponent like gave answers, and then at the end of that process, I think it was the following Saturday, everyone voted who they thought should be the candidate for the state election, and we went
Wow.
from there.
Wow. There
So,
you go.
but actually, the what I can say in David's defense is that he's a person that was involved in Per Capita, which is like a progressive think tank that started off in Victoria and New South Wales. He has been involved in various like community groups in the area, and
Mm.
yeah, like he actually was a low local through and through, which
Yeah. Yeah.
at least I could understand that people might be skeptical about that after what happened with Christina Keneally
Mm.
in the last federal election with Labor, with
Yeah.
the seat of Fowler.
Mm.
Like, sometimes head office has its influence, but it's not always the case.
Mm. Mm.
The rank and file try to win as many battles as they can.
Yes. Yes. And that's a good kind of takeaway, I think, to have from this whole discussion is that my perception of political parties and the political process in a democratic situation is that just the party chooses who it wants in the political arena. And like rank and file membership is just for people that really like to volunteer. They don't particularly have any say about what happens. They don't have any real stake in the process. They're just there to help out and make sure the larger organization kind of runs smoothly. But it does sound like there is quite a level of intricacy and stratification in terms of the powers at certain points of the process and who gets involved when, and how it functions and feeds into a larger system. But it sounds like, yeah, it's based on democratic in a democratic understanding, and then obviously allowing things to filter, like you were saying before, from the ground up, and make their way into proper agenda items for people that are potentially running local government areas, state government areas, and even at the federal level. But like what I really want to, before we close out, what I really want to understand from you,
Mm.
though, is what have you kind of learnt yourself from this process? Is there anything that you would have liked to have known before you joined up and became a member, or any advice then that you have to someone who's potentially, after listening to this, being like, you know what, I'm going to go join my local working class party and become a member? Is there anything that they should know before joining up? Any lessons for us 4IS?
Um, what I would say is, look, I personally feel like when you get involved in this sort of political arena and you want to join these kind of grassroots organizations, um, it's it can be a bit of a bit of a shock because when you first get involved in this, there is a lot of argy-bargy, even against other parties um, as well as within um, the party itself. So, you get the usual argy-bargy of, oh, you know, stuff Liberals, stuff the Greens, stuff Nationals, and you'll even get within the party, you'll be part of the left faction and you'll say stuff the right faction. But once you get past that argy-bargy within uh, politics, what you end up finding is people who are passionate, people who care. And I've at least found that where we are right now with pretty much wall-to-wall Labor governments here in Australia, apart from Tasmania, following the election cycle that I was part of, which was, at the end of 2021, the local election that happens that led to the federal election that led to the state election here in New South Wales. I found that the reason why we ended up being successful was us finding grassroots movements where we had an issue to fight for, and people's willingness to use our two ears, just sit down with people and talk. Because if we didn't do that, if we didn't do those rank and file meetings where we sat down with the Friends of Erskineville, Red Watch, the local residents that were at Glebe that were basically saying, why is my home being taken away from me? We wouldn't have the argument, or we wouldn't have had the structure to go off to our local branches and be like, hey guys, this is a problem. You should really do something about this.
mm,
And have that swell of passion around a certain issue that
mm,
you could take it from step to step to step
mm,
that ended up producing fruit. Because really you can jump through those hoops and you don't always win. It's just,
mm,
it's nice to get some sort of recognition where you do actually end up winning. But
mm.
it's more about the it's just as sorry, it's also about not only uh the issue or the cause that you're fighting for, but it's also the people around them. Because
Mm,
what I've learned is it's not only about, oh, hey, I'm part of the red team and I believe in the red team's cause, but it's also, I've learned so much from the local branch's president. I've
yeah,
learned so much about the from the local branch's secretary. Hell, there's somebody in the local SEC, the State Election Council, that he just kind of took me under his wing to get me much more involved in this political structure within the
mm,
labor movement. And like I I am much more keen on becoming a delegate for my own branch, because I can see that we can enact change, or more specifically, we can enact um, policy creation within the labor movement.
yeah, yeah. So while it may be daunting to start with, there is some type of hope, and there is the ability for you to really to roll your sleeves up and get your hands dirty if you really want to get into it. Is that what I'm hearing?
Yeah, you end up finding like-minded people and
Hmm. So don't be
doing
afraid
something
to
about it.
join. Is that
Yeah.
what I'm hearing? 4IS?
Yes. Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, very interesting. Very interesting. Because yeah, like I've said, there's this rhetoric out there, and you hear it from people that are involved in, like civil rights movements, and we're out there getting like protesting and, being arrested and joining activist groups and stuff like that. And they said just get involved, because like we live in a democratic society, and until we don't, so we live under some type of totalitarian, authoritarian regime or fascist regime where, that sort of stuff is outlawed. That sort of stuff has an effect. And like you can carry people's emotion and passions with you, um, to make sure that real issues are being addressed by the political establishment, not
Mm.
just for their friends in power and the whims of the lobby industry and lobby groups and things like that. In a democratic society, there still is a way to make your voice heard, even though like it's hard sometimes, it's still there. You just have to find the resources and be involved in the process. And so it's very inspiring to hear someone not only talk about their journey, I guess, like you have in terms of getting involved locally, and at a grassroots level, but it's also interesting and gives the mind some type of, I guess, further insight into how it all works, just hearing the functions of a party, especially a workers' party. So thank you very much for that, 4IS.
No
I
worries.
think we might wrap it up there. And the synthwave art for today, 4IS, very synthwavy, might I add. And the prompt for this was,
Solidarity forever. And
wow.
yeah, I'm very curious about the
Mm.
reason why it's gone in that direction. But it's definitely looks like album cover.
Yeah, doesn't it? Yeah, yeah, and of some pop icon as well
Yeah.
from the future, but a retro future. So, yeah, very interesting artwork. I'll make sure that it goes into the video so you can see it properly or full screen for those of you who can't see it. But look, that's it from myself. For all of you out there, please remember, I am, you are, we are a mystery. And to sign us off today, I'll leave it to you, 4IS.
Yes. Thank you, everyone. And remember to keep thinking and keep learning.